Park rangers have some of the creepiest jobs out there, being deep in the isolation of woods in the middle of nowhere, where you can run across dead people, murderers, or even something paranormal. These 10 stories coming from our state parks and park rangers will definitely put a creep in your night. So, sit back, relax, and prepare for some nightmares. This happened about 3 years ago in Western Maryland. It was late September, and 3 of my friends and I were at a camping trip at a state park outside of Cumberland. We got there pretty early in the afternoon and set up camp because we wanted to hike around a bit before it got dark. Anyway, after we got back to camp and the sun had gone down, we gathered some wood for a fire. We were in the process of building the fire when we noticed a light suddenly appear at the top of the hill by our campsite. We were down in a small valley with steep hills all around us, and it was very dark because it was heavily forested. We all kind of ignored it, thinking it was either the moon coming up or maybe there was a building that we hadn't noticed before. As time went on, I became curious about the light. Like, I needed to go up there and see what it was. My friends didn't share my curiosity and had no desire to check it out. They just kept telling me it was the moon coming up and I was being stupid. To me, the light didn't appear like anything moonlight, and it wasn't really like a moon, so it was starting to creep me out. I took off up the hill and put my mind at ease. The hill was densely forested and full of briars. It was totally dark except for the light up ahead, so I had to proceed carefully. I was almost to the light when I heard something moving up ahead. I stopped so I could hear it better, assuming it was a deer or some other woodland creature. However, it didn't sound like a deer. It sounded like something, maybe a person sneaking in the woods, moving slowly so as not to make much noise. Then I heard another sound coming from the other side of me. I froze, trying to get an idea of what was approaching me. The footsteps got closer, and I just stood there waiting for whatever it was to find me. Then, I saw it. It was the classic gray alien, about 5'5", and the light from ahead was reflecting off of its skin. That is the only thing I remember about it. I didn't get a very good look at it. I was just kind of scared, and I think I lost consciousness. The next thing I remember, I was picking myself up off the ground. It didn't seem like any time had passed, but there was a definite lapse of consciousness, like I was taken out and reinserted into time. I decided to go back to the campsite. I could see the light from a fire my friends had made. But on my way back to camp, I start hearing voices inside my head. I have no history of schizophrenia and consider myself a very calm and controlled person. I have never had anything like this happen to me before or since. The voices were very subtle, but they were definitely there. At first I was kind of ecstatic, but I was actually communicating with what I thought were aliens. This is the most amazing thing to have ever happened to me. They tell me I am special, and they chose me to make contact because I was open-minded. However, they soon start mocking me, and their tone gets very ugly, and they begin to sound almost demonic. They tell me I'm going to burn in hell and to kill myself. They tell me to throw myself into the campfire and get it over with. I am terrified at this point, and I can't get the voices to stop. I get back to the campsite, and my friends are enjoying themselves like nothing had ever happened. They talk to me, but their voices sound different. They sound like their voices were the ones that I heard in my head, and all I can understand is that they hate me and want me to die. I pretty much have a panic attack and lay down on the ground crying. The voices in my head continue to torment me, and it just keeps getting worse. Finally, my friend starts holding me and telling me everything is fine. We are both atheists, or at least agnostic, but for some reason she tells me to pray for Jesus. I start praying out loud and asking Jesus to help me. I do this for quite a while, and the voices finally die down and go away. I go to lay down and try to sleep to forget about what just happened, and I see the moon coming up over the hill. One of my best buddies from college was a geologist major that ended up becoming a ranger in the southeast United States. We haven't spoken in years, as is the case with age, but I remember about 8 to 9 years back he was telling me about an old married couple that he had recently helped out. He had seen them come to the park several days in a row, and found out they were visiting from out west, and they had gotten engaged there decades prior. They had been searching for a spot they'd taken pictures of when they popped the question about having trouble. After looking at the pics and figuring out roughly where they were trying to get to, he escorted them in his vehicle, then hiked them to where he thought that it would be. They found it and he left them there and went back to his station at the entrance. He said he got a weird feeling once he got back, and felt like he needed to wait to see them whenever they left. Well, once it came time to lock up at night, he still hadn't seen them leave, so he reported it. He left his assistant to wait at the shack at the entrance and wait for them where he left them. He went back to try to find them. He found them both there laying down, spooning along the bank of the river. Neither were alive. He called the cops, went through the 9 yards and went home. The police were able to disclose them to their identities, but weren't sure of anything else initially. Later he learned that the wife was terminally ill with cancer, and they both committed suicide by ingesting some sort of chemical pill combination. They just chose to do it where they had gotten engaged at. My bud wasn't torn up about it. He was obviously sad for them dying, but said he thought that they wouldn't have asked for help earlier because they didn't want anyone to think that they helped kill them. Just to give you a background on me, I am a 29-year-old, and I have been researching and investigating the paranormal since I was the age of 9 in 1998. I am an extremely realistic and logical person, and I am not easily excited over things that go bump in the night. I have seen and experienced some things in my life which most people will not believe, but that's okay because I'm not here to convince anyone of anything. I'm just here to share. My light in the sky experience happened a few years ago. In 2014, I was living in New York and had gone to Jones Beach State Park one fall night with a friend of mine. It was a chilly night, so we didn't plan on staying out long, but it was nice to be able to walk along the boardwalk without dealing with crowds of people. We had stopped at a covered picnic area to sit down and chat. The night was clear enough to see the stars, which can sometimes be difficult with all the light pollution on Long Island. We lost track of time with our conversations, and as we got up to leave, I glanced up at the sky. I love the stars, and noticed something. It was a very bright light. It had appeared over the horizon that wasn't there a moment ago. My friend, seeing that I was staring off into space, literally looked up and thankfully saw it as well. Of course, we had two initial thoughts. 1, it was an airplane, or 2, it was just another star. We watched it for a few solid minutes, and it never moved from where I sat, ruling out the possibility of it being an airplane. Side note, my boyfriend is an airline pilot, and I spend a lot of time watching airplanes. This is definitely not a plane. So, a few moments go by when we notice a second light, just as bright as the first, appear seemingly out of nowhere. It manifested, if you will, right below the first light, and just hovered there. Naturally, we look at each other and exchange perplexed glances. When we look back up again, a third light appeared below the first two. I don't know how long we stood there looking at these lights, but we did verbally discuss all the possibilities that might explain what they were. We tried very hard to be realistic in debunking this phenomena. After a while, the light shifted, taking on a triangular pattern. Again, we stood, mesmerized, and watched. They did not change positions again. After that, it felt like forever. We finally decided that we should leave. It was starting to get late, and we started to walk away, assuming that when we looked back the lights would be gone. They weren't. They stayed right there in the sky, in that triangular pattern for almost our entire walk back to the car. Only when we reached the park exit did they disappear. We do believe what we saw were UFOs, though I'm not 100% comfortable labeling it as an alien per se. I was working as a prospector's assistant in central Manitoba one summer. We were doing a helicopter-assisted magnetic anomaly investigation. Best summer of my life. There's nothing like ringing in your ears dissipating after the helicopter has dropped you off and slowly increasing volume of the bugs taking its place. You know for sure you are in the middle of nowhere. It was the last day of our campaign. This was a little piece of the property close enough to a road that we didn't need a helicopter. It was a low priority target and was saved until the end. We had kicked so much ass during the high priority targets, we decided to do this one on the last day just for an easy in and out of the bush. Around 9 a.m., we heard yelling in the bush, which was odd. Nobody else should be out here. We kept on grabbing samples, and it's in the back of our mind. Around 11, we hear it again. It's a little closer this time though. We cut back and call out again, but it was silent. Now, through our travels of this 30-kilometer piece of property, we came across many pieces of animal evidence. Deer, moose, and rabbit droppings were everywhere. A few carcasses here and there. Bear tracks and bear feces were seen a few times, but nothing prepared us for what happened next. Around noon, we were in an old blast hole from the 80s. Prospector Dave told me he used to have a blasting license and that blowing shit up in the middle of nowhere is really fun while drinking beer. It's his favorite pastime as a prospector. They changed the laws a few years ago though, so now they can't do it because it caused way too many forest fires. We were facing due west with our GPS on some rocks, getting the most precise UTM it could, when we hear an earth-shattering, bone-chilling howl. I looked at Dave and he turned so white he was almost green. I picked up the GPS and put it in my belt and unclipped my bear safety spray. Then, at our 9 o'clock facing due west, another wolf, then another at our 10, and another, all the way to our 4. Dave calmly said, "We need to leave, but you cannot run. If you run, you die." We left most of our sampling shit there. We also carry these modified steel sledgehammers for breaking rock and scraping moss. Most useful, durable thing I've ever had. It's at the ready along with my bear spray, and we walk. Longest walk of my entire life. We didn't say a word and I didn't hear anything, but I'm positive they followed us back to the road and into the truck. We drove back to town and proceeded to get thoroughly drunk. In the 90s, before everyone had cell phones, my Girl Scout troop was camping in a state park when a terrible thunderstorm came through the area. With major flood warnings, the rangers at the park frantically came through every campsite and evacuated everyone to higher ground. Everyone, that is, except for us and the Boy Scouts in the site next to us. We went to bed with light rain, but woke up in the middle of the night to our tents collapsing from the driving rain and the water quickly rising. The Boy Scouts, they were 12 to 16 years old, we were 7 to 9 years old, and ours helped us quickly pack our sites into our cars. Unfortunately, the roads were too dangerous to drive on because we couldn't see how deep the water was, and we didn't know if any sections of the road had been washed out. We abandoned all the vehicles that used the map that scout leaders had to find some place that wouldn't be flooded. A few miles away, there were treehouse cabins that were built around a tree and lofted 15 feet in the air. It was decided that we needed to move quickly, and that was our best shot. The older boys and the adults carried the smallest girls when it became clear that the wind was preventing them from staying on their feet. The wind and rain soaked everyone through the skin. We made it to the cabins, and the adults broke in and raided the emergency supplies there for space blankets. There was no way to build a fire because there was no firewood. It had been an especially dry year, and starting campfires was forbidden due to the risk of starting a forest fire. I remember shivering for hours, all of us girls in the middle of a huddle on the floor with the Boy Scouts on the outside trying their best to keep us warm. One of the boys asked if we knew any Girl Scout songs, either camp songs or more of a Girl Scout thing than a Boy Scout thing, or they were just humoring us. We sang every song we knew, and the leaders taught us a few more that they had learned. At some point, we were convincing the boys to sing in rounds with us. Morning came and the rain slowed down to a light drizzle, and a ranger showed up assessing damage to the park. He discovered us and immediately drove us to get help. They returned with a bunch of trucks and all-terrain vehicles. They drove us to a location where doctors were on site to evaluate us. It was sheer luck that none of us had anything worse than the chills. It could have been worse than it was, and they were unbelievably lucky to have survived it all. We could have easily died in our sleep if the flood had come through all at once instead of slowly rising. If the Boy Scouts hadn't been there, then us small girls would not have been able to hike out of there safely. If we had to try to drive, we would have been washed away. I am a seasonal ranger for my local forest district. Despite the fact that I live in a fairly suburban area, the forest preserves still make up 12% of the county, with much of the property being heavily wooded, not far out to wilderness but pretty secluded in some areas. Being a seasonal employee, I have been on the job for a bit over a month now, but in my short time, I have found a creepy things. Here are 3 of those things. 1. A dead man in a tree. The rest of the rangers say that they find about 1 suicide a year, so here was the one for the year. When we go around opening parks each day, we drive through to make sure everything is okay. In this instance, I was driving through and had just lost sight of the road when I saw a man hanging from a tree in a clearing. He had hung himself. I called the cops and the coroner. Freaking coroner took about an hour to show up, and he was the only one with the ladder long enough to cut the guy down. So I stared at a dead guy in a tree for about an hour. 2. Crazed, drugged up naked man running around a parking lot. It took me and 3 other rangers to catch him. When we finally caught him, found out that he had multiple cuts across his body, running through brush, and had a rock ledged firmly up his ass. 3. A headless deer. Normally when a pack of coyotes take down a deer, yes, we have a bunch of coyotes around here, they leave bite marks all over the body, along with torn flesh everywhere. But the head was cleanly sliced off and placed directly off next to the body, meaning this is something created by human intervention. We still haven't figured out that one yet, and I have only been on this job for 5 weeks, so you can only imagine what a full-time forest ranger has probably seen over a long career. This happened in either 97 or 98. The memory came flooding back to me several years after my father passed in 2007. It was not a suppressed memory. It was more like a decade or more of life got in my way and I forgot about it. Anyway, I live in the Midwest, and it was either December or January. It was the time of year where high school is in season, but college is not, so just before Christmas or possibly early January. I know because my brother was home from college, but I was cheering basketball games at the time. My dad was driving me from home from cheering at a varsity basketball game. It would have been after around 10:30 p.m., and either a Tuesday or a Friday, since that's when the games were. We live in the country, and I do remember it was cold and a brisk night. There was snow on the ground and the moon was really bright and the snow was almost sparkling. We came down our country gravel road and came to the top of the hill where all of our mailboxes were. Dad wanted to stop and get the mail. To the right, there are the mailboxes, and to the left is an expansive farm field. There is no other way to put it, but to the left, there was a large, cylindrical object hovering at a slant over the cornfield. The side tipped downward maybe 5 feet off the ground. There weren't any lights on it, and it made no sound. I think we kind of gaped at it for a while, and then we were like, what the fuck is that? I remember my dad saying that he was going to ask the farmer who owned the land if he had bought any new farm equipment. Mind you, this was the dead of winter, and no one would have been in the field with their farm equipment, let alone one that floats middle in the air like that. I remember saying to him, "Dad, that's no piece of farm equipment." And he was like, "Yeah, I know. Let's get out of here," and roared his little Ford Ranger off into the night down to our house. On the very short rest of the way home, we were like, "Oh my God, we have to tell my brother and mom when we get home." However, when we got home, my mom was experiencing a severe gallbladder attack. She had been having gallbladder problems for a while, and we didn't have any health insurance, so she had been putting off getting it checked out. Push came to shove, and that night we had to take her to the ER, and she had to have surgery, and this whole crazy experience got lost and was never talked about again. My dad passed in late 2007, and several years after that, like I said above, the memory came back to me like a flood. Unfortunately, now I can't ask him about it if he remembers it too. I did work my way around to asking my mom if Dad ever mentioned anything to her over the years, and she said no, he hadn't. I really wish that I would have remembered before he passed so I could have asked him, or, frankly, that he was still here to ask today. It really bothers me and I really want to know what he remembers from that night. This happened about a year ago. I was 15 at the time, camping with my family, and also a good friend who we will call Zach, who is the same age as me. We were out camping in a campground called Miquelin Lake, which is a campground in central Alberta, Canada. The lake is basically drying up shit pile now, but the scenery is nice, and we know most of the staff at the park. The campground is of modest size and is often filled to capacity. There are a series of trails over by the park center that takes you through the forest. We decided to walk down one of those in the evening. After some walking, we found an old trail that we had not taken before. It was overgrown, but you could clearly tell it was a pathway, and so we took it to see where it would go. After walking for about 15 to 20 minutes, we heard some rustling in the bushes. Zach figured it was a beaver, as they were common around here. But I looked, and to my horror, I saw a cougar's face peering at us from behind the bushes. I could barely make out its yellowish eyes, but it did seem like the cougar was moving. And yet, we still heard the rustling in the bushes. I pointed at it and told Zach, and he began to panic. Cougars often try to stay away from humans, but they are getting more common. So, even though they are unlikely, it is not impossible to find one. I told Zach to remain calm and backpedal away with me, and we began to backpedal. I could tell he was scared shitless, but I told him the rustling was probably its young, and we probably stumbled upon its nest by accident. I figured so long we made a point to backpedal away, the cougar would let us go. We backpedaled down the trail for some time. When we felt we were safe, we turned our backs and continued walking. We rounded a corner only to find the cougar standing there on the trail in front of us. It was staring at us, and obviously wanted to attack us. I was shocked at how fast and quietly it was able to pass us. At this point, it was clear the cougar was toying with us, and that an attack is imminent. I had a K-bar knife on me at the time, in case the situation got worse. And so I pulled it out. Truthfully, a knife probably would not save our lives against such an amazing predator, but it is better than having nothing. It's a useful tool, a weapon for hunting or defense. So, it was better than nothing. I think Zach knew the cougar was probably going to attack too, given my reaction to the situation and the cougar's odd behavior. We were both tall for our age, and though Zach was scrawny, I was quite muscular for my age. Even so, if the cougar chose to attack us, we would be in trouble. I told him to backpedal away once again and to stay close. He did not listen though. He booked it. Before I knew it, the cougar was running towards us. It was fast. I chose to fight as my natural response to danger. It was probably also my best chance of survival at this point, as running would be my only result in being attacked and dismembered. Perhaps, if I bought Zach some time, he would be able to get help from people walking the trails. or there was always the possibility that he would rush to my aid. The cougar got close to me, so fast that I barely had time to react. I plunged my knife into its torso, right as it jumped towards me. It growled in pain, but the wound, though it was deep, was not lethal. Perhaps maybe I just hit a rib. It shoved me to the ground, clawed my right hand, forcing me to let go of the knife, and tried to bite my throat while sinking its claws into my shoulders. Zach at this point was running away yelling for help. To be honest, I do not blame him. Yes, he probably should have helped me out while screaming for help, but some people, they're just too afraid and they don't know how to react. I protected my throat with my left arm, which was lucky by my chest, before it clawed my shoulder, so I was able to defend myself. It bit my arm, which was the worst pain I have ever felt. I could hear the sound of its teeth puncturing my arm and ripping it to pieces. I remembered advice from some show stating that shoving your arm down a predator's throat initiates its gag reflex, forcing it to stop biting you at least for a moment. Remembering this, I shoved my arm further down its throat, and the pain got worse, but I was able to fight through it, and thanks to my adrenaline rush. The cougar gagged and promptly let go of after the struggle. This gave me a few seconds at the most to prepare for the next attack. However, I was still at its mercy, and I knew my chances of survival at this point were low. Suddenly, I heard a loud bang, and the cougar let out a small whimper before falling on its side. I stood up and saw a park ranger running towards me along with Zach. At this point, the pain in my left arm was starting to set in. It was messed up bad, and so were my shoulders, both deeply scratched. I did not realize it hurt me, as bad as I thought it did, until I looked up and felt the pain set in. He explained that other hikers had reported the cougar earlier, and so he came to the trails to find it and heard Zach's cries for help. After performing the first aid, he took it to his truck, which was quite a walk to get me and Zach to our site, and to get me to the nearest hospital as my wounds were serious and could easily become infected. My parents ended up driving me there as the ranger could not leave the campground on duty. Leaving Zach in the trailer at our site, Zach was shaken, but he was amazed that I was still alive. I needed stitches for my shoulders and my left arm, which to this day is still damaged permanently, but it could have been a lot worse. It was a very terrifying moment of my life, and I could have easily died there. Later, after I was treated, I talked to an expert from the park. He told me that the cougar attacked us because it was in pain, and we approached its nest, and it had porcupine quills in its throat. He said that it probably would have left us alone if we did everything right, at least initially. If it wasn't for the quills in its throat, we probably never would have been attacked at all. I have an uncle that used to work as a ranger in Michigan. He's gone through nights of tigers loose in a campsite without a working flashlight, drunk guys drowning in the rapids, and kids found dead from hypothermia cradled peacefully at the bases of tall pines. But he never seemed disturbed when telling these stories. He saw it as just a part of the job. He took me and my middle brother on a walk through my grandparents' woods one evening, while all the adults made dinner. The other two boys were completely occupied with a video game that was only 2-player, and so our uncle decided that he would give us two some special attention. Especially to me, as being the only girl, I would get excluded from a lot. We watched for maybe 15 minutes before my uncle stopped dead at the swamp area in the woods, a place we went to often to hunt for mushrooms in the summer. But right in the middle of the soggy forest fluke was a 10-foot spiral staircase that none of us could ever remember being there before. It was like someone had built a house and everything, but the stairs had been swallowed up by the swamp. At the top was a very small landing where a welcome mat and carpet sat, completely clean and untouched from what we could tell. I looked up at my uncle, and the look on his face struck me like a cold ice pick. He was terrified, shaking like it was winter, and his eyes darting around on the tree line like he was looking for something. He grabbed our hands and walked fast. I have always been very short and unable to keep up. I found myself being carried all the way back to the house. He set me down only when we were in direct sight of the house and told us not to say anything about it to anyone, especially the boys, and to not go out of sight of the house without him with us. We were very confused and scared, and as it sounded just insane, we kept our mouths shut. I recently went back home to visit and convinced my brother to come with me to see the staircase. Though it took a lot of convincing to get him to come along, and he refused to go without our gun or a 200-pound mastiff, we got out there to the right spot and there was nothing. Just a clearing. No bits of metal, no carpet, just an empty clearing and a nice big patch of mushrooms. Those mushrooms might have been our dinner if our mastiff hadn't growled the moment we stepped towards them. It was probably at a deer, but we left quickly and have never been back or told anyone what we saw. When I was around 10, I was playing at a state park with my cousin, who was a year younger than me. It was a neighborhood park a few streets away from my house, so we were allowed to go there alone as long as we were careful. So, my cousin and I were in this sort of crow's nest thing. We were going up and sliding down this pole. We were pretending to be firemen. At one point, I noticed a white SUV circle around us a few times in the parking lot. Then I saw it again, and again, and again. It wigged me out, so I told my cousin we need to leave, but I wasn't sure if the car would follow us, and I didn't want them to know where I lived. At a certain point during this car's circuit around the park, we would be obscured from its view by trees and buildings, so I waited for the car to reach that point, and then we hightailed it out of there. It's kinda sad because I love going to that park. It's a beautiful state park, but a lot of really creepy reports have been coming in from the park recently from perverts and stuff. I guess you could say perverts ruin everything. While my story wasn't necessarily the creepiest out there, I definitely do think that that van might have something to do with some of the missing cases that are coming from our local state park. Hey guys, thanks for watching this video. If you enjoy these park ranger and state park stories, be sure to subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to never miss a new upload. I upload multiple times a week on many topics just like this one. Be sure to also give this video a like and comment down below what you'd like to see me cover in the future. Thanks for all the support, guys.